Hello everyone and welcome to today's episode of the Shredding Skeptic, where I thought I would take us on a quick journey through Arma 3, still one of the top-rated military simulators. And I also wanted to explore the famous quote by Karl von Clausewitz, "War is a mere continuation of politics by other means." And I feel that this quote is especially pertinent given the growing partisan divide between the left and the right. This is a phenomenon that, if left unchecked, can lead to war, because the only other alternative is for either side to concede their position. And once both sides become entrenched in their position and become convinced of their own righteousness, the question becomes not so much are you willing to die for your cause, as are you willing to kill for your cause. And of course, history has shown us that of course people are definitely willing to both die and kill for a cause, and this has of course shaped the world that we know today. I'm going to be drawing a lot from a book called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, which illustrates why it is that we choose to divide ourselves based on religion and politics. Haidt and his colleagues were basically able to break down morality into these 6 different foundations that have a lot of their basis in evolutionary psychology. I don't want to get too heavily into the nitty-gritty of it, but what I'll do is I'll just lay down the 6 foundations amid our artillery strike on our bottom stream here. So first up we have the Care-Harm Foundation. This is basically a mechanism that would have evolved as an advantage for individuals who were responsive to signs of distress. They were more likely to take care of their young, and of course that advantage would be passed down genetically. Next up we have the Fairness and Cheating Foundation. What this would have evolved as would be a mechanism by which we could play tit-for-tat with other people that are outside of our default family unit. This would allow us to keep track of acts of cooperation or selfishness, and allow us to feel feelings of contempt for those who have cheated us. The Loyalty and Betrayal Foundation is one of the necessary modules for forming tight and cohesive groups. When in strict competition with other groups, it's important to have a mechanism to detect who it is that is a team player and who it is that is a traitor. And you'll find that all the way through history, people who are team players who betray are often treated much worse than enemies. Next up we have the Authority and Subversion Foundation. Now you may be wondering what role authority might necessarily have to play in the foundation of egalitarian groups. But with authority comes a certain responsibility for those subordinates. And of course, having a mechanism primed and ready to detect any threat of subversion to that authority might be adaptive for other members of the group. Authority is all about protecting order and repelling chaos. When people violate this, we feel it instantly. I mean, could you imagine if you were in one of these firefights and all of a sudden one of your buddies is like, "Hey, Sergeant, you're an asshole." You'd probably feel as if the cohesiveness of the group was threatened. And even if you don't particularly like the sergeant, you may feel inclined to just say, "Shut the hell up," and continue to lay down cover fire. Next up, we have a Sanctity and Degradation Foundation, and what this is largely tied into is the emotion of disgust. Our navigation through our environments is always a constant balance between an approaching and a fear of new things. And those who had a much more finely calibrated sense of disgust were much less likely to poison themselves. Also, it was a great advantage for a society to be able to elevate certain people, places, principles, or even objects to the level of the sacred in order to bind individuals together behind them. And if there was any sort of desecration of those sacred pillars, society's reaction was likely to be swift, emotional, collective, and very punitive. In this way, you can think of sanctity as the opposite of disgust. Like if they were on a pole from one end to the other, you'd have the sacred on one end and the despicable and the disgusting on the other. And frankly, without this foundation, it becomes very difficult to understand the controversy behind things like abortion or doctor-assisted suicide. These become very simple issues to think about without this foundation. So in sum, the Sanctity Degradation Foundation may have evolved as a response to our challenges with pathogens, but has now evolved to become a sort of behavioral immune system, if you will. This allows us to respond to a wide variety of symbolic objects and threats. And for better or for worse, it is this extreme investment of value into these objects, both positive and negative, that are used for binding these large groups together. The Liberty Oppression Foundation was the most recent addition that Jonathan Haidt added to the book. Haidt proposed that this mechanism evolved as a means of living within groups and also keeping out signs for any attempts of domination by other members. If a particularly aggressive group member were to attempt any sort of domination, bullying, or constraining of other group members, a certain reactance would occur, and this causes an immediate feeling of opposition. I'm sure many of you have been told by an authority figure not to do something, and it just makes you feel like you want to do it even more. So what this causes us to do is to reach out to other people who may be in a similar situation and rise up together to basically remove this oppressor. Individuals who fail to respond to this attempt to domination with a kind of self-righteous anger that unifies a group of individuals together face the prospect of reduced access to resources. In the same way that Julius Caesar was slain by those around him, eventually oppressors can take it a little bit too far and find themselves involuntarily ventilated at the hands of their close confidants. So those were basically the 6 foundations that Haidt uses to discuss moral psychology. So before we get into why it is that this may be contributing to the growing partisan divide that we're seeing in the West, I thought it would be good to talk a little bit more about Arma 3's gameplay. Arma 3 takes me all the way back to the original Operation Flashpoint. There was something about that game and this game that just gets your blood racing in a way that not a lot of other games are capable of doing. Although the squad control and communication system does feel a little bit dated as it is basically a copy and paste from Operation Flashpoint, there are certainly some redeeming features that make this game a shooter that's very competitive with even the likes of Call of Duty and Battlefield. Understand, however, that this is a very different experience than you can expect from the much more cinematic and railroaded experiences you're likely to have with a Call of Duty or Battlefield title. Realism is the name of the game here, and when you have to run about 1.5 kilometers to your objective, it's going to take you some time, so fortunately the game does include the time compression feature that Operation Flashpoint has, because this game is not as concerned about making every single moment of your play experience as exciting as possible. What you get in exchange, however, is a shooter that is in a league all of its own. The giant open maps allow you to literally approach the situation from any angle you deem appropriate. And of course, you can bring as much ammunition as you can carry. Quick tip though, more ammunition is better. Of course, the argument could be made for a loadout that maybe has a little bit less encumbrance, but I find just running from point to point and allowing my stamina to recharge does give me enough time to ensure that my tactical plan is still on track. As for my unit formations, what I tend to do is to have 2 guys flank left, 2 guys flank right, and have 3 guys fall back, which allows me to do a lot more of the scouting up front, as I find the AI for some of my compatriots is a little bit lackluster and does leave quite a lot to be desired. I haven't yet had a chance to jump into the multiplayer community of this game, but I imagine that's probably where this really shines. In not having to deal with those AI issues, you're probably more likely to have an authentic experience compared to playing against some of these bots, as the bots don't tend to behave all that realistically a lot of the time. Now again, this is just my subjective experience, and of course your mileage may vary. So I wanted to bring you guys some Arma 3 footage today because I thought it paints a very clear and visceral picture of the kind of world that we may live in if this bridge cannot be crossed between the two sides. Although human beings may have evolved to be selfish in a way, we've also evolved to be groupish. So although evolution does confer a survival advantage to acting in one's own interest, it also confers a survival advantage to operating in one's group's interest. We may not be wired to be saints, but we are wired to be decent team players. Now there are some key differences between the way those on the left and those on the right see these different foundations. Liberals tend to rate care and harm higher than all else, whereas conservatives tend to rate them much more closely together. And I hope this graph can help to illustrate why it is that there can be such a huge divide when trying to explain the differences in morality between those on the left and those on the right. So when trying to understand why it is that some people will kill and die for certain principles, keep moral psychology in mind. Shredding Skeptic, signing off.